I chose the topic risk breakdown structure for my risk management tools and technique for Project Management 614 by Jared Borth. I'll be going over some topics today, briefly describing the technique description, just kind of some definitions and supporting material there. I'll do the history of when the tool was created and where it was used, and then actually application of some different instances where it's used in the workforce, and then step-by-step instructions of how to actually use the technique and go over some advantages and disadvantages, and then also alternative tools and techniques that are similar to the risk breakdown structure, and then I'll wrap it up with a conclusion. The risk breakdown structure is very similar to the work breakdown structure commonly used in estimating the work required to get a project done. It's more of a top-down breakdown of the risk faced by a project. The practice standard for risk management describes it as a hierarchical framework of potential sources of a risk to a project. An organization may develop a generic risk breakdown structure for use across all of the project, or a project may use a project-specific risk breakdown structure. So what does that actually mean? Risk breakdown structures organize the risk into categories of potential risks in a project. It's essentially groups and organizes and defines the total risk exposure of the project. Each descending level represents an increasingly detailed definition of sources of risk to the project, and I'll get into that in a little more detail later. The use of the risk breakdown structure actually is in two different stages. You have the development, basically you develop the hierarchy, and then the application itself. So developing the hierarchy involves creating the hierarchy itself, either based on past experience or relevant concerns of the organization. And then the application is the risk breakdown serves as a resource for identification, analysis, and reporting. That's the actual use of it in the field. This is a relatively new technique as it's been around for a long time. The Software Engineering Institute's taxonomy-based risk identification developed the earliest RBS in 1994. Later on, Dr. David Hilson introduced its current form, which is a bit different, that is used in the PMBOK in 2002 at the annual PMI seminar and symposium. This is an example very similar to the one that Dr. David Hilson created. As you can see, the first column shows all sources of project risk, and then it breaks it down into 4 sub-columns, or sub-risks, and then those 4 sub-risks each have 6 subcategories as well. So it's a lot easier to organize risk and be able to look at all the different categories individually. Application. Here's some of the inputs and outputs. Obviously, going into the application of the risk breakdown structure, we need project risks. Then the risk breakdown structure itself goes into the application, and then the objective for the application. Some of the outputs that you get from this would be very more extensive list of risks. You put all the risks into categories, and then you have a hierarchical diagram as well. This is a risk breakdown structure used in a study determining whether or not project managers can use existing risk management tools to renovate buildings, existing buildings, rather than using new risk management tools in constructing new buildings. They created 2 risk breakdown structures, one for the existing buildings and one for the new buildings, and they compared them and concluded that the risk management tools used for the new construction cannot be used for renovating or existing construction. So as you can see, this is a little bit different chart than what was in the PMBOK. This is actually, as you can see, is it's in rows. So all the external sources of the project risks are on top, and then you have internal sources of project risk for number 2. Underneath that, you have legal risk, political risk, economic risks, social risk, and natural risk. Those are all the subgroups or subcategories. And then under those, that you have the actual risk categories. Here's a little bit different risk breakdown chart as well, or risk breakdown structure. This is a risk breakdown structure that was used on a huge IT project, so you can see that as very, very, very complex. The more complex of a project means the more complex risk management tools that need to be utilized. You can see that there are many different levels here, so really you can go down to be as specific as you want to be or as general as you want to be. So it really just depends on if you're doing a project such as building a playground equipment, or something as complex as this is maybe a project that lasts for 2 years and have a lot of different risk involved in the project. Now we'll go over step by step on how to use this technique. First, you're going to identify general categories of the risk sources. These should be large-scale concerns. Within each category, identify subgroups. As with the work breakdown structure, the key here is to create a discrete group of risk sources. These are subsets of the higher categories. Then we'll gather project risk identified. Use virtually any idea generation technique to identify relevant risks. Exhibit the risks. Work with a group to organize the risk appropriately by using logic and natural groupings. The process of affinity diagramming works well here. Then we'll review the parent groups and subgroups with the participants. We'll identify the risks. Then sort the risks. Sort the risk into the lowest level of the RBS. Then you'll sum the total number of risk in each category at area at the lowest level. Then we'll characterize the risk. The value will illustrate either the risk source with the greatest volume of risk serving as an indicator of the risk requiring the greatest attention. Then finalize, utilize the values. If the values are summed into the highest level of the project level, then the total may be used to compare the level of risk to other projects. Advantages and disadvantages. Some of the advantages are that it offers a framework for the other risk identification techniques such as brainstorming. It ensures coverage of all types of risks. It tests for blind spots or omissions within your project, and it helps identify recurring risks. And it can be very simple or very complex depending on how, simple and complex your projects are. Some of the disadvantages, there really is no disadvantages. Alternatives to this method would be affinity diagrams, process decision program charts, or interrelationship digraphs. Finally, since not all projects are the same, organizations wanting to use the risk breakdown structure should develop their own specialized risk breakdown structure. Either one generic, one covering all the projects, or specialized ones depending on the project types. When applied in conjunction with effective risk identification and idea generation techniques, the risk breakdown structure can be a particularly powerful tool. Thank you.